want to welcome you to one of the most remarkable journeys you will ever take. Come and join me as we walk the corridors of the mythological dragons and beasts of St. John's Revelation. During the 3rd century after the crucifixion of Christ, the powerful bishops and Arians came into debate on the floor of Constantinople under the guardianship of Constantine. Constantine was a Christian king, and he wanted a nation that was not divided. Thus, at the end of the debate, the Arians lost and their work was relegated to the Dark Ages. The bishops, however, knowing that humanity was illiterate, that they thought the world was the center of the universe, felt that the secret teachings of Christianity could not be given. To quote one of the early bishops, it would be like giving a weapon into the hands of a child. Among these secret teachings was the mysteries of St. John's Revelation. A new age has dawned now, and for the first time in the history of the manuscript, every single symbol will be broken and every mystery will be revealed to you. I am your hostess, Elizabeth MacDonald Burrows. Welcome to another episode of Odyssey of the Apocalypse. We left off last week on chapter 12, the fall of the dragon. And we have learned that the dragon happens to represent our self-centeredness or our ego. And we started off with the scripture of St. John 12:48, when he said, "He that rejecteth me and receiveth not my words hath one that judgeth him. The word that I have spoken, the same shall judge him in the last day." And the last day means that last and final period when the soul graduates from mortal to immortal, puts on the clothes of immortality to sail on angel wings forever. As we continue on with chapter 12, there's something that we want to take a very serious look at, and that is Michael, of course, the archangel, because Michael is going to be called forth to fight this wily old dragon, which we have come to know as our lesser self and ego. So in Daniel 10:21, the archangel Michael is described as the Prince of Israel and the great prince who stands in times of conflict over the sons of your people. As a special guardian of the Jews, it was prophesied that Michael would defend them in their terrible time of trouble during the Great Tribulation, when the remnant would be delivered and established in the Millennium Kingdom. I have found it quite fascinating that in the book of Daniel it should also prophesy of this great time that would befall mankind when we would enter into this Armageddon battle, or this battle of mortal against immortal. Because that is, of course, the Great Tribulation, a time that we take a look inside of ourselves and try to straighten out all of the unlearned lessons and fight for our immortality, to conquer our human ways of life. And it said the Great Tribulation and Millennium Kingdom, of course, are none other than that resurrection of the dead and the descent of the heavenly state on earth, which is referred to the Apocalypse, or the descent of the New Jerusalem. John the Beloved has used the earlier prophecy here to depict Armageddon. In this case, Michael represents the great regenerative force and guardian angel who defends the divinity of the soul through its struggle. With that, we will turn to our first verse. first verse, chapter 12, and I'm sure that you have your Apocrypha New Testament, you have your King James Version, and above all, your Unger Bible Dictionary. And once again, I want to stress that when you come to these things, you really should look them up in your Unger Bible Dictionary, because we cannot possibly understand this symbolism or the reason for the symbolism without knowing something of the culture of the times. So I found that it was a tremendous help to be able to look up wheat and barley and bears and things like this that we're going to run into. So in our first paragraph of chapter 12, last week we talked about the female aspect of the soul, which has given birth to the Son of God, or will give birth to the Son of God. And that this female soul is, the female aspect of the soul, is the same in both men and women. That the soul is looked at as female, regardless of the physical embodiment that it might be wearing. Primarily because it is looked upon that the Christ is the He, that divine spark of God is the masculine aspect of the soul, and the soul is that which becomes the bride or the female part. So she is saying, and she being with child, cried, travailing in birth, and pain to be delivered, which represents us so much when we finally start seeking for those answers of why are we human, and where is hell, and where is God. These things that we find often that are not answered in our structured and fundamental churches. And as a result of this, we travail, we want something and we don't know what it is. We have an urge inside of us that makes us feel like we've been called to do something, or that we should do something, or there's something that is incomplete in our lives. And when I say this, I'm saying this about almost everybody in the world today, because we cannot and do not feel complete until we have found that spark of God that is in us, or that seed of greatness. And when we know that we're going the path that destiny has prescribed for us, there's a peace with this. So we travail in striving to be delivered, that we so much want to find this mysterious key. I've met people who've read 2,000 and 3,000 books and still looking for something, running from organization to organization, church to church, looking for something, only they don't know what they're looking for. And of course they're looking for that divine peace. Once they found it, it will be put in place and the travailing will be over with. So this is that spiritual person who is travailing to be born. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon. Oh, I've waited a long time to get to the dragon. Red dragon, having 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his head. And of course, red is, if you remember, that represents bloodshed, sacrifice. The dragon is, of course, our ego. So this dragon comes out, and it means we have got to sacrifice the corporeal egotism and self-centeredness in order to become one in God, or in other words, to move from self-centeredness to working for the good of the whole world. And of course, he has ruled over the 7 epochs, meaning 7 cycles of creation. We have been bound to the ego-centered ways. And of course, though he has 10 horns, which he will rule until we return to one. And he has 7 crowns because he has ruled over those 7 epochs of creation, or certainly the 6th and moving into the 7th. And we wish you, again, to understand that ego or self-centeredness has not been wrong. It is wrong for the world of tomorrow, because we have to leave that world behind if we are to work together as a world family and work for the good of the whole. But self-centeredness assured our survival for over 10 million years. Human man is 10.5 million years old. And if it had not been for self-centeredness, we would not have been able to protect ourselves. So now that the time has come to fight the wily old dragon and to get rid of him, we must never hate the 10 million years of culture in which it has assured our survival. Let us remember this as we fight the wily little creature. His tail drew down a third part of the stars from heaven and cast them to earth. This tells us then that we're going to go into the purifications of the body, and that we will eventually go into the mind. And I'm sorry, I think this is the purification of the soul, which moves into the mind and then into the body. And so the dragon stood before the woman that was ready to be delivered to devour the child as soon as born. So it means that all of our old habits and ways and customs and attachments all come flooding out, trying to not intentionally destroy the spiritual path for us, but to draw us back into the ways that are familiar to us. We don't know what's going to happen to us if we step into that abyss that's going to take us into the spiritual life. But we are familiar with our corporeal world. We are familiar with the habits that we have been born and raised with. So now to step beyond that, all these fears start crowding upon us. So, and she brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God and to his throne, signifying, of course, the birth, the soul giving birth to that great Christ consciousness and ruling all nations with a rod of iron. Iron means inflexibility, that there is but one plan which governs the vast universe of the stars. Any deviation from that one plan brings about cause and effect. So the will or the rod of iron represents that divine plan, now incarnate virtually in the soul of mankind. And of course, we've talked about this before, how when he is born of the soul, and we raise him from the dead, resurrect him from the dead, that he is absorbed, restored to his heavenly abode. So this is what it's saying, that he's caught up to God and to his throne. Of course, he'll descend again to woo the soul and to prepare it to become his bride. So the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. And of course what this means is that she must, this part that gives birth to the divine child, with the dragon ready to devour it, has forced her to seek isolation. But in the seeking of isolation, there's all this knowledge that floods in. You see, the knowledge doesn't just flood in at the moment of our divine connection with cosmic consciousness, or that time when the Christ raises the soul into that cosmic connection. But the knowledge pours in for many years, particularly the first 4 or 5 years. Actually, the soul or the person is taught far beyond academia. You can take a person who has never had a college education, you can take a person who has had a college education, and in 5 years that one who has not had a college education will supersede or be more intelligent and more knowledgeable in many facets of existence than that one who had the college education. This is not to say that with a college education that they do not illumine too. One of the great teachers I studied with was certainly bound or involved in academia. He graduated cum laude from Sorbonne in medicine, degrees from Vienna and Leipzig in psychology and philosophy, and a degree from Paris in archaeology, and he spoke 15 languages. He still had the simplicity, however, of the illumined person, one who had completed this transformation of human to divine. So in fleeing the soul, or the female aspect of that soul, fleeing into the wilderness is prepared by God by the continuous knowledge and education in all facets, in many facets of natural and cosmic law, particularly those that pertain to the mission that that soul has been designated to bear. And of course, the Spirit won 1,203 score days represents 1,260. That the two now, that the one has become two, and that it is bound to the sixth cycle of creation, and can only be restored by the return to the one. And there was a war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought against the angels. So now at last we're starting the throes of the Armageddon battle, and that part that is going to represent the soul in this great battle now comes forth with all the forces to help the soul to fight against the dragon. It said after the soul, if we can go for a moment to a footnote, it said after the soul has given birth to the indwelling Christ and entered the wilderness of the dark night, or the resurrection of the dead, it passes into a most remarkable state. Although it must purge the uncleanness from itself, it is also receiving great knowledge and revelations. Having already been shown the divine plan of God, which is the basis of all things, the soul is completely educated in the ways of God, including all philosophies, sciences, arts, and religion. During the first few years of this wondrous transformation, the soul is changed from mediocrity into greatness and becomes competent in many things. As its education has been wrought by God, it rises far beyond the boundaries of academia. It is for this reason that people such as John the Beloved seem to possess such great genius, although not credited with study through formal education. So this great war that now has come upon the soul, as the forces, all this knowledge coming into the soul, opposes what the soul has already known, the attachments and the familiarity. And now suddenly there's a new adventure there, and as we said, it's very difficult for the soul, which has been encapsulated in the corporeal world for so long, to want to take that dedicated spiritual path. So it said, the dragon fought and his angels and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. Meaning now that the Christ has descended, rules over the soul, he's not going to allow anything to come into the soul which is going to lessen it. And by lessening it means he's there to purify. So when a person has a negative thought, it immediately comes back. When they do some action of unkindness in the physical world, then immediately, I'm not going to say a retaliation, but he brings the soul into deeper darkness to realize the pain it has caused another, so that we ultimately will step beyond this being unkind to others and beyond hatred and anger. So it said the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan. And this is the first place that we really find that this ego, such a direct reference to the fact that this ego-centeredness of us, this lesser self, is always been referred to as the devil or Satan, which deceives the whole world. Because our attachments in the corporeal world has deceived us. For instance, we mourn deeply when we lose someone, when they die. And yet, why? When they never really die. They take off a body, a worn out body. Their suffering ends. Or it might be a young person who has finished the lesson that has to be learned, whose life is taken. And we mourn that someone is not in the corporeal body to suffer anymore. So when we realize there is no death, there is really no old age, that we live in infinity, then we start casting these enticements out. So it is saying that it is the corporeal world and the egotism of it that has deceived the soul through centuries, in making it believe that there is darkness and evil and death and the end, that we get it stuck in a grave and we're buried in darkness to never more be again. And also, the dark angels are part of hatred and anger. I don't like to call them dark angels, our dark thoughts. The dark aspects of the ego has hatred and anger and lust and gluttony and slothfulness and ignorance and superstition. All this is cast out of it in this battle. So that's what it's talking about. He's cast into earth and his angels are cast with him. So all of a sudden, everything that we have done in the world of hatred and anger and lust and jealousy suddenly comes to our focus in the physical world. We suddenly see what we have been, and unfortunately I'm afraid we don't like what we've been very much. And if we could but realize that we are graduating, that we're in a process of being reborn, perhaps we wouldn't hate ourselves quite so much for what we've been. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, "Now is come salvation and strength, and the kingdom of our God, and the power of his Christ, for the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before God day and night." So it has been now cast down to earth, that which has been, which we have been subject to through the centuries of time. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto death. Remember what I said, we don't like ourselves very much when we see all that we have been, and when it says they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb, means the sacrifice of this divine spark that has been placed in us. There is no greater sacrifice in the world than the fact that God gave a part of himself to each of us, to live in each of us, to wander in with us through the darkness and unknowing, to assure that every living being would have an opportunity for this resurrection, that he was always there and always will be there. I think of this God that rules this 150 billion galaxies, loving so much that he put a part of himself in each of us to live in the isolation of the corporeal world, so that we would build our world and learn the lessons that a corporeal life could teach us. No, I don't think there's any sacrifice that would ever be as great as that one. It said after the Spirit has descended in the flesh, meaning after we have raised that divine spark, it has descended again, and the soul enters the hall of judgment, where it stands final tribunal. The false ideals that it has followed throughout its life of ignorance are all revealed. The soul, with its newly resurrected Christ, wishes to walk in the ways of God, but is unable to obliterate the past until its unlearned lessons have been learned. To escape retribution, or the disciplines required to free the soul from the chains of matter, seems impossible to the soul at this time. The dragon, ego or self-will, of this divine metamorphosis causes the soul to remember those things which have been in direct violation of natural and cosmic law until it has completed its purification. How can we purify something or change something if we cannot see it? So now, because of the Christ, we can at last see these things, we can correct them, or we can change them and become everything that we've always wished that we could be. Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of earth and of the sea, For the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth he has but a short time. So now, having stirred up that self-will, the ego and self-will, into this violent corruption of remembrances and attachments, he still knows he has a short time. There's always a knowing in the soul that it will one day end, and that we just simply have to work through it. So he knows this, and he comes down, of course, that wrath is the memory of these things. And when the dragon saw that he was cast to earth, he persecuted the woman which had brought forth the man-child. Of course he's going to persecute the soul. It's going to bother the soul, filled with guilt and all these memory patterns. As I said, it really doesn't have to be this way if we could just simply accept the fact that self-will was a part of human progression. But alas, we're not apt to do that at this point. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle. So at last, even though the dragon is there, we're at last going to be rescued because we're given 2 wings. Wings means transcendency. That she might fly into the wilderness in her place where she is nourished for time and times and half time from the face of the serpent. So in order to help the soul to combat this wily old dragon, it is fed the spiritual knowledge and the mysteries of the universe, and the mysteries of progression. And there is so much, the mystery of death and dying, the fundamental basis of the body, so that we can transmute the body into retarding the aging process, not eliminating it at last, but retarding it, increasing our IQ, feeling pain less, being more comfortable with hot and cold. That alone is just some of the miracles, as I deem them, that come with the physical body. And then there is the mind, which just changes. If you had about 110 or 120 or 130 IQ, you'll have about 180 when this is all over. And this is what gives the soul the ability to transcend all this that the self-will and wily ego is trying to entice it with. And of course, she's nourished for time and times and half time. We're back to that. Remember, time is 1, times is 2, and half time is that half day coming from the early morning to noon or high noon, where, like when the sun is in its zenith, after the 2 have become 1, the soul and Christ stand resplendent as the sun at high noon in the physical world. So until the 2 become 1, she is nourished with all of the tools that will enable her to protect herself from the wily old dragon. And the serpent cast out of his mouth water in a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away with the flood. Now, this is where he lets loose all this conflict in the mind and these ideas in the mind. So we will be moving from the birth of the Christ in the soul into now this battle that takes place in the mind alone, as new thoughts and new ideas begin to fight against the old ways of life. I call it severe case of mental indigestion, of which I have been unable to find a pill for yet. But if I ever do, I'll let you know, so it'll be easier for you than perhaps it has been for others before you. We kind of, so it's carried away by the flood, and we will just be finishing this chapter here. 16, and the earth helped the woman. Our affinity for natural law will help the soul through this. For instance, we need exercise to dissipate the negative energies because we're lazy by nature. The Spirit, He wants us to perhaps go to work, and we want to sleep late. It's Saturday morning. After all, we've worked all week. Why can't we sleep late? Why should we get up early on Saturday morning too? And so the Christ wants us to get up early. We don't want to. We want to sleep late. And as a result, if we do, we lose our connection with that remarkable energy that comes only at dawn. There is a restoration that takes place in the world at dawn, a special energy of purification. If you realize that the sun shining up on a pool which has chlorine in it evaporates the chlorine, then you can understand that the sunrise begins to purify the earth and the water, to take away the impurities. This is, of course, somewhat dissipated when the heavy traffic starts again and the day's work sends up fumes of pollution. But in that period of sunrise and early morning is a regenerative time. When we sleep through that, the important part of our day, that part when we could accomplish the most, has been dissipated. And we are caught then soon in the ebb of the day, of the dying day, and therefore do not get accomplished what we could get accomplished otherwise. Our thing, like on Saturday morning, is to stay in bed late and stay up at night. And then the same thing happens on Sunday again. And we miss all the real work that could be done on Saturday, and the peace that could come with Saturday night and by being in harmony with the laws of nature. Well, that's only one thing. If we eat chocolate cake, we know that it's not good for our bodies, but we eat it. Now with him, he's not going to perhaps allow us to eat the big piece of chocolate cake. There does come a time when you can kind of negotiate with him. However, you say, oh, I really would like this piece of chocolate cake. Maybe I just eat half of it. He may allow it or he may not. But nevertheless, these are the things that cause us to war against him. These are just small things that I'm bringing out now. He supervised what you read. Those fiction books with violence and carnality, you're not going to be allowed to read them anymore. And so your whole lifestyle is changing. So certainly the earth, our obedience, or shall we use the word obedience, or let us say our application of the laws of nature, are going to help us to purify the body and refine it. And as the body is purified and refined, there is less war between that which is higher and that which is lower. So purification of the body does become an integral part of this great battle. And the dragon was wroth with the women, and went forth to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandment of God and have the testimony of Jesus the Christ. So that higher self, which now has the Christ incarnate with it, and trying to keep the commandment of God, the big war is on. Well, that ends chapter 12, and it's going to take us into chapter 13, but perhaps it's time for a couple of little lighter stories. I've brought out what is known in India as the Gita. To many in the world of Christianity, any other religion or philosophy in the world is virtually blasphemy. But I like the Gita because it tells us the reason for the battle. And having been a teacher and taught students for well over a quarter of a century, I have watched so many people come to that gate where many are called and few are chosen, and start through those early trials. And I have yet to see anyone who doesn't, to some degree, who doesn't reflect Arjuna, who is found in the Gita. And I thought maybe you might enjoy this. And please, it is not the study of heathen. It is in reality, the Gita is really a philosophy. It's an allegorical story that tells about people who come into the throes of this battle and who decide they don't want to fight. Arjuna, who in the Gita, this allegorical story, is a powerful archer. And he's a great warrior, and he's won all these great battles, and he feels very very smug in his self-centeredness that he can fight any battle there is. And so in his devotion to God and so on, he suddenly he comes into this. And remember, in India, Krishna consciousness is the consciousness, the light consciousness of God, the same as to us, Christ consciousness is the light consciousness of God. Just different names for this great light, which is incarnate. But anyway, he now sits there. In fact, I probably could use the word Christ in this, and it would perhaps simplify our understanding of it. So he says to the Christ, the great Christ consciousness or Krishna consciousness, take me to the battlefield, which of course is the soul. Take to the battlefield and let me see my enemy. Because he's certain that he can have this battle over with in just a short time. So this is kind of what he saw there. And remember, this doesn't have to do with the fact that we have families or we're married or we love our children or husbands and wives. It's our attachments for them that brings us pain. How can we be married to someone and not have an attachment? We could, if we were in divine will rather than human will, where we would always be deeply concerned and realize that the Christ is in our partner and that we are serving the Christ rather than the corporeal aspect of our husband, in that sense, or husband or wife. So it's more the way we do things, because normally in a romance there's jealousy and there's anger and fights. In the spiritual marriage, these wouldn't happen. The love that between a husband and wife would be so much greater than anything that they've ever experienced as human partners. So that's what it means, a changing of this. So anyway, Arjuna, the warrior, he has been taken to the battlefield by the great consciousness. And he's sitting there, his soul, and looking at both sides, his good and his bad. So he saw stationed there both armies. He saw his fathers and grandfathers and teachers and maternal uncles and brothers and sons and grandsons and friends. He saw his father-in-law and friends also in both armies. Remember, it's the army, his good and his bad. Then he's seeing these standing there, arrayed in the battlefield, began to feel deep pity for himself because, well, it's pretty hard to give up traditions and perhaps break this, the family ties and everything, rather than looking at it that we're all one world family and that divine love makes a greater family than human love. So he said, seeing his kinsman, he says to the great Christ consciousness, he said, my limbs fail and my mouth is parched and my body quivers and my hair stands on end. And that's just about what happens to each of us as we come up to that threshold of that divine and holy gate when we are tested to see if we are going to go on into that transformation or the resurrection of the dead. He says, the bow slips from my hand and my skin burns all over and I'm unable to stand and my mind's whirling around as it were. And I see adverse omens, he said, and I don't see any good in this at all. I do not desire victory, nor kingdom, nor pleasures, because what avail is dominion to us, of what avail are the pleasures or even life? They for whose sake we desire kingdom and enjoyment and pleasures stand here, having renounced life and wealth, teachers and fathers and sons and grandfathers. Of what happiness can I get from this fight? What is the kingdom of heaven? Something I don't know anything about. Immortality, something I can't see, something I've never experienced. And here are all these memories of the wonderful holidays we've had and getting together for the family picnics. Why is it that we can always remember the getting together for the holidays and the family picnics and the wonder of this, and we forget all the fights we've had within the family? I don't know. Somehow or other we seem to retain the good in the soul and throw the bad away. So we forget all the difficulties or the sorrow that we experienced when our great uncle died. All this is put away. We only remember the good times. So he's saying, I remember all of this, so why should I go for this thing I can't even see? And so he said, I do not wish to kill. Even though my ego and my attachments may kill me, I don't care. Because I don't want to kill. I don't want to destroy these old patterns of my life that I'm so familiar with, just for the sake of dominion over the body and the soul and the spirit. And he says, for the sake of dominion over the three worlds, the world of the physical, that world of the unseen, where our fathers and mothers dwell, and in that world and kingdom of the spirit, where the angelic kingdom, even for dominion in these three worlds. I just do not wish to do it. So we skip a page here, and he said, he's still crying over here. He says, alas, this must be a great sin to do this, that we are prepared to put away these attachments for the good and pleasure of this kingdom I don't know anything about. So he does precisely what we all have an inclination to do at this point. And probably after you've heard this interpretation of St. John's Revelation as it was brought from St. John, you probably have the same urge. But in case, having spoken, sitting there in the middle of the battlefield, Arjuna sat down at the seat of the chariot, and he cast away his bow, and a bow, of course, is war. He cast away his bow and arrow with a mind distressed with great sorrows. And he said, I will not fight. So it happens to be that the rest of this is, of the book is a discourse that's done by that divine, Christ, that indwelling Christ or Krishna, in trying to convince Arjuna, Arjuna and his soul, to make this great fight. And there's a few words that make us think, and then I'll go on to the next chapter here. But the blessed Lord said, whence is this perilous condition come over you, this dejection, this unholy, this heaven excluding? It's disgraceful, Arjuna. And that's about what the Christ is going to say to you when you get on the portals of that immortal gate in transformation of human to divine. He said, don't yield to impotence. It doesn't befit you. Cast off this mean weakness of the heart and stand up, O scorcher of foes. And so, of course, Arjuna says, how shall I in battle fight with arrows against these armies who are really fit to be worshipped? How am I going to do this? He said, better indeed in this world to eat even the bread of beggary. Better for us to live on the streets and to starve and to be winos and anything else, rather than to have to make this righteous battle. Of course, having journeyed this long path for such a time, it's hard for me to conceive that a person would throw away their seat of greatness for a few attachments. But I have to remember back a quarter of a century when I stood, 27 years ago actually, when I stood on that portal and had to look at my attachments and the things that I had violated of natural and cosmic law. And I can understand it, but now having gone the other way and seen the other world, it is hard for me to realize why I did it in the first place. But in my heart, I always wanted God. So that gave me the strength to go through this great and mighty battle. So he would rather eat the seed of beggary than to do that. And he said, you are grieved for those that should not be grieved for. Yet you speak words of wisdom, because the wise grieve neither for the living nor the dead. The wise see the law of cause and effect. The wise see that bad only happens when we have somewhere done bad, that good reaps good and bad reaps bad under that cycle of cause and effect. So he's saying, why do you grieve? So later he's going to say that we have arrived when pleasure and pain are the same, when cold and heat are the same, when we take them the same. Oh, that doesn't mean that we're not going to feel cold and heat. Doesn't matter that we're not going to feel rich and poor, but we will take them with the same understanding and tolerance, regardless of which it is. If we have great wealth, we will assure that we share it with others. If we are in poverty, we know that it will pass away, and that someday we shall have our greater needs. Well, now that we've taken a look and know that the battle is the same all over the world, that we all have the same trepidations and the same lack of understanding of this side that we cannot see, this spiritual, shall I call it a utopian world, almost, that is there, which is so invisible to us and so unknown. Perhaps now we'll see that whether it's east or west, it's the same. So shall we go to our next chapter, which is, of course, the beasts of the sea. This means we're not only going to deal with this wily old dragon, but we're going to deal with the beast of the mind and the beast of the body. And I chose for a scripture to represent chapter 13 so much, whereby, that's Ephesians 3, 4 to 5. Whereby, when you read, you may understand my knowledge in the mystery of Christ, which in other ages was not made known to the sons of men, as it is now revealed to his holy apostles and prophets by the Spirit. Remember, when we first started this, I said that this was never taught to the open masses, but was rather taught by Jesus to his disciples, of which several went through this great Armageddon battle, or the resurrection of the dead. And also it was then later kept in the great mystery school of the Roman Vatican. The priests, the Pope and the cardinals, were initiated into the mysteries up to the time of the Borg. And then things changed, and from that time on, it was watered down greatly. So how much of the complete mystery is known now in the Vatican is not for me to say, because you see, I have not been initiated as a cardinal in the Roman Vatican. So it's simply saying it was kept secret, and now it is saying, which in the ages was not made known to the sons of man. This is now being revealed, and this was John's task, to reveal this and leave a work which would survive the centuries to at last enlighten mankind. When the age came, when the purification of the soul was imminent, and when we would step in to the portals of the seventh epoch. I think that it is something that was written here that I quite liked, and it's a little story. It happened to be that the aspects of the soul, immersed in the corporeal world with its ego and self-will, which of course we know now as the dragon, is comprised of a physical body, the feelings, emotions, the conscious mind, the semi-material and subtle sheath, which interpenetrate. Most of us don't realize that the soul interpenetrates the body, and that the heavenly kingdom itself interpenetrates the soul, so that we are walking in all three of these worlds simultaneously. So quite, excuse me, quite naturally, the dragon has been appointed guardian of the lesser aspects of the soul because it contains the residual of the soul's unlearned lessons. In thinking about this particular phenomena, one is reminded of the famous story depicting Adam, and by the way, Adam represented collective man, or the Adamic, the descent of the soul to live in the world of matter, where Eve or night, darkness and unknowingness, led it astray. I think we've mentioned this before, but if you could find the Hebraic tongue restored, which I understand is out of print right now, by Fabre d'Olivet, who was a great illumined man, who restored or brought to us the original Hebrew. I think you would find that King James indeed is only a shadow of what the truth really is. So if we can remember that Adam represents that Adamic, the collective man, or the soul's incarnation into the world of matter, we can perhaps understand the story a little bit better. Because he tries to return to the Garden of Eden, just as we're trying to return to that divine estate, or to go to that divine estate. So soon after finally finding his divine nature, and soon after having done this, he comes upon a great dragon. And I like to tell the story that Adam knocked upon the door of heaven and he was rejected, and then he goes out and wanders in the wilderness for a while longer. He knocks upon the door and he's rejected. And finally one day he comes to this remarkable awakening. And in coming to this remarkable awakening, he suddenly comes back to heaven, knocks on the door and says, "You really can't keep me out of here, because I know who I am. My body is corruptible, but my soul is immortal." So he is allowed to enter into the heavens, the kingdom of heaven, and here is this great dragon wrapped around the tree of knowledge, or the tree of life, which is the tree of knowledge. And the dragon asked, "Do you recognize me, Adam?" And Adam replied, "Yes, you are Satan who led me astray." And the dragon thrashes its tail and replied, "Indeed, I am Satan, guardian of the tree of knowledge." Remember, our lesser nature guards, draws us into the corporeal world, takes us from the tree of knowledge. So he said, "I am guardian of the tree of knowledge, and I have vowed," and this is the most important words, I think, "I have vowed that none whom I can lead astray shall partake of its fruits." Meaning, as long as we're led the way of the corporeal world, we will never partake of the tree of life. Our lesser nature, the ego, sees that we do this. But on the other hand, he said, "I have turned you against the illusion of worldliness and weaned you from your desire by tempting you through the world of matter." And I think this is the most remarkable part of the story. All this time that we've been directed or drawn into the corporeal world, we have really been learning lessons. And from it we have learned values. And we come to realize that here in the corporeal world, that how would I analyze this? By saying that the diamond necklace will go when you die. So why do we desire the diamond necklace? We were tempted to have one only to have it stolen from us, and learn that that kind of value is to bring pain to us. So he has done this to wean us of our desires. He said, "I am your adversary, the one who pleads your destruction before the eternal tribunal." Meaning that he now, as long as he can lead us astray, we shall not partake of the tree of knowledge. Well, I believe that concludes it for today, and we will begin with chapter 13 next week. Be sure you join me.